today we're gonna cover the last three chapters, and you might be thinking, "Whoa, three chapters? Why is that?" Well, if you read the book, if you're reading along with us, then you'll know that the three chapters, it's not even half of the chapter before that. So the three chapters are very short, and yet, as James pointed out before the recording, the plotline just kind of explodes. Everything happens in these three chapters. And this is the thing with Eumeswil's unconventional storyline, which normal storylines has like a beginning, middle, and an end, whereas this one, it has a a context. There's no beginning. There's a context, like an introduction for like the first 99% of the story, and then there's an end, right? And everything happens in these final three chapters. So it's like everything was leading up to this point. Anyways, today we're so just to give you a brief recap. What's gonna happen is after he talks about uh, the his singing as a historian, we're gonna first talk about some of the things that happens in the ending. Right, we have Attila. We have the fact that he gets asked to go on a hunt. He goes on the hunt, and then he never comes back. And and while he's gone, the government is overthrown. Uh, the Condor, I believe, is overthrown, and then he's just presumed dead. Uh, Meanwhile, his brother finds the diary. By diary, of course, it's the story that we have in our hands, and he archives it. So, uh, it probably means that it came from the archive and it somehow came into our hands. You know, that sort of thing. And then we're gonna talk about Eumeswil in a more meta perspective, right? The philosophy behind Eumeswil. We left out Stirner and Nietzsche last week when he went to the Luminar, I believe. Now we're gonna bring that into this week. We're gonna talk about why Jünger would think the way he does. I mean, the answer is obvious there. And then finally, how it compares to our society, and uh, you know, uh, chit chat about what we can do if we live in Enormousville. Uh, I said a lot, but um, I assure you, from now on, we're gonna uh, converse more with the rest of the people here. So, are you guys there?
Yeah, we're here.
All right.
One thing I just want to jump in is right at the very end, you mentioned it. I did find it incredibly interesting that it's revealed that this entire text is in the hands of his brother, who Martin is not being too friendly to the entire novel. But it is interesting that he does decide to archive and presumably publish this work and maybe even edit it. We're not certain. And it's kind of revealed then. It kind of explains partially why this text is so odd, right? It almost has an in-world uh, meaning because this is very much the loose sketches of Martin's work that he actually hid in his bunker and was found. It says by hunters who were chasing a buffalo and made its way back to his brother, and that's very interesting. Just as a little starting at the very end, like I said, but I kind of like that just as a story element.
Oh, for sure. When I actually, uh, I mean, I'm an impulsive thinker. So when I first read the words, my brother Martin Venator, right, who vanished years ago, with like, it's like it goes. I had to read until the third paragraph where it says, "As my brother saw uh, heir," that I understood that he was talking about his actual legit brother, and I thought it was just was some like poetic way to say that the Anarch has completely taken over Martin. I thought that was what the story was saying, and then I realized, oh no no, it's his actual brother. But yeah, definitely when we don't know why he archived it, right? Is it because you know, out of brotherly love? Is it because it has some historical significance, or is it both? Something else, right? We don't know the motivations behind it, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. That little bit is even written very differently from the way Martin writes. It feels a little different. You sort of immediately realize this isn't being written by him. This is being written by someone with a very different mind. And it's only one short paragraph, but certainly I felt it when I was reading that. And that's something that Junger's done before. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting that his brother does decide to archive it. Maybe Martin was slightly wrong about his brother. Another interesting aspect that because his brother does say that he loves him, and he says that Martin did not love his family, which does seem to have been somewhat true. Interesting, just interesting little bit there at the end. But to take it back slightly to probably what's going to be the main topic here, once we get into it, which is the catacombs in the forest and what the climax of the novel is, which is the flight of the condor and his entire retinue, and Martin, who gets to go along with them. He's actually asked, and they flee the city. It's kind of hinted. I feel anyway that it's hinted before that the Condor's power is slipping. It's kind of mentioned that in a few sentences. One of them. Martin says he feels that the Condor could hold on a little bit longer when he hears I believe he hears fishermen and he hears the sound of the market basically, and he senses okay maybe this isn't going to collapse tomorrow, but it's getting close to that point. I think is what is sort of the flip side of that. And so it's interesting that Junger is hinting here that the cycle could be about to be broken, right? The cycle of the constant condor, tribune, dictator, and then failed attempt at a democratic system. And the thing that's going to break it is the coming power of either the catacombs or the forest. And this is all very this is all very difficult to prove essentially in the novel because it's very esoteric, it's very confusing, but in a good way. And yeah, I'm sure we're going to talk about this more, but that's just for everybody listening. That's sort of what the climax of this novel seems to be getting at.
Yeah, well, this book is certainly isn't written in the most chronological manner, so we don't have to go about the book chronologically. I can definitely talk about that now. See, you mentioned how the power of what the condor is slipping, and I'm like, I could be like, yeah, sure. I mean, that's a possible, very possible. Uh, but then you said that it's the cycle itself is slipping, so it's no longer gonna be taken over by the what do they call it, the tribune. So, um, you think that, and then you further made the conjecture that it's gonna be taken over by the forest itself. That's a bold statement there, James. Are you sure about that? Because if it were true, the implications are very significant. Because it wouldn't be surprising that someone as smart as the Martin would detect that. He would detect the trends that the force is coming. So that could be one of the reasons why he decided to go on that trip and then purposely escape. Right? Um, he does hint that the hunt may be uh, like a conspiracy to execute Martin, even though uh, they have no incentive to kill him. But um, Martin talks about it to, I believe, Vigo, and uh, they agree that something's brewing in the background. But James, if you say that the force is going to take over both the Condor and the Tribune, then he may have used that as Martin may have used that as an incentive to um, just live under a new regime, which is the regime of the forest.
Yeah, in truth, I'm not sure. Right? I mean, it's very difficult to say what happens at the end of this novel. There is a massive. We could talk for a very long time that ultimately Martin chooses the forest over the catacombs, which is itself incredibly telling. Because you'd think he'd choose the catacombs because that the catacombs, as far as I can tell, Junger refers to it. He sort of describes it. He describes the catacombs as the tree of knowledge, and the forest as the tree of life, which again tells you an incredible amount. But it's interesting that Martin chooses the forest over the catacombs because you'd think, with his love of the luminar, his love of history, his love of pure material knowledge, that he'd choose there. That's where he says that I think he said Bruno would go for there. But he chooses the forest, and as far as I can work out, and again, take this with a bag full of salt, but the forest seems to be implying the return of the gods. There seems to be some hope that the forest itself is going to, again, this is incredibly vague, but it seems like out of this place where snakes as big as dragons are forming and trees as high as it almost feels like something from Gulliver's Travels. There seems to be implying to me anyway that there's this huge primal earth-like force that could give birth to the ability to worship gods again. Now, I'm not sure how exactly that works, but I think Junger is setting up a dichotomy here between the catacombs, which is pure technology, right? Man as God. This is going to be man completely mastering technology and possibly space through pure knowledge, and or the forest, right, which is going to be man once again returning to the worship of possibly nature. I don't know, possibly the Greek gods, right, pre-Christian gods, animals, raw power, survival, things like that. And Martin chooses the forest. And when I say that the forest or the catacombs could break the cycle, I think what I mean is sort of the problem with Eumeswil, right, is that nothing is serious, nothing is believed in, and they're just trapped in this fossilized society. But if the catacombs of the forest sprang to life and did whatever it is that Junger's implying they could do, then that would end that, right? Then suddenly either the gods would return or, man would become some sort of technological being, right? So that's what I mean by that. And again, for everybody listening, read it yourself because this is rather vague. But that's how I felt the first time I read it. I read the book a couple of years ago, and that's how I feel even stronger now.
Yeah, you're definite. I mean, you definitely probe deep into it. I can tell. I mean, I guess to be fair, it's not your first time reading. I don't think so. You could definitely see beyond where I can. Right, I've only read it once. I like how you were bringing up the dichotomy between absolute uh, technological environment as countered by that nature, but like pre-civilization, return to monkey kind of thing, and well you have to remember that this is set in a world where it's we don't know how we don't know what's beyond Eumesville, and we are hinted that it's a post-apocalyptic world that has been after nuclear wars, right? So like beyond this, it's it's very chaos, right? Order and chaos again. It's the unknown, and I figured if he is choosing that over society, then if if he is if we can take it for granted that it's chaos, and if we can take it for granted that he is choosing it because it's chaos, then we must infer that he too knew the downfall of Eumesville was imminent, where the difference between Eumesville and the forest is going to minimize until it all becomes the forest.
Yeah, yeah. But the interesting thing is that he didn't go to his bunker, right? He could have just said no to the to Attila, right? I'm just going to stay here, and then he could have fled to his bunker. I do think there's something bigger in his choice. I think the fact that it's called a hunt is just a cover story. I think it's implied they're not. I think they know they're not coming back, and they're not hunting anything. They're going somewhere. They're going. I've always seen the forest as sort of the Junger's passion for sort of the magical, mystical. as opposed to his sort of, I wouldn't say dislike of technology, but his certainly worries about it. And he doesn't seem too harsh on the catacombs, to be fair. It's even strangely implied that they don't go into space, which is interesting. That's kind of a dent in my theory that it's sort of representing technological overcoming. But I do think that the choice to go into the forest represents something beyond the actual words, right? It's not. He's literally. They're literally going to a forest, but they're also not literally going to a forest, right? They're choosing a path or humanity, and Martin's choosing one, and he's choosing this return to. I can only say return to gods. Uh, the forest is implied to have been made by. Uh, it seems to be implied to be made by nuclear bombs. It seems to have been radiated, and then it's just sprang into this incredible plutonian fire, uh, or spurred to life by this plutonian fire in a kind of opposite way we think of nuclear bombs. But you know, we used to imagine that radiation would sort of, make things mutate into all kinds of crazy things, and so it gets kind of implied that this forest could have given birth to anything, right? I mean, animals the size of dinosaurs or whatever, and all kinds of creatures, and it's possible that something that big and a forest that wild could sort of inspire man to believe again in something. But yes, I don't know. It's such a difficult web to untangle here at the end.
Well, speaking of difficult webs to untangle, we do know someone who can help us out on that, and he has a very peculiar name. Like Eumeswil, it's probably a reference to someone. Uh, I'm probably gonna place my bets on Attila the Hun, and he apparently has spent time in the forest as well. Ain't that right, James and Elliot?
Yeah, Attila has been to the forest at least once, and his description of it again is so odd, right? He was traveling, I think, presumably in a caravan through the desert, presumably a nuclear wasteland desert, and he's the last survivor, and he makes it to the forest, and he gets into it, and he's wounded getting into it by thorns and all these trees and stings and strange things, and cuts him up badly, and he loses all his clothes, and apparently he sleeps in a tree as big as a house, which with like a path cut through it. And when he awakens, he has clothes back and all his wounds are healed, and there's food and wine for him. Is this a dream? Is this real? Are there people living in the forest? Who knows? But again, it's sort of tying in with this idea that the forest is a magical place, right? It's actual magic, right? There's this sort of return of possibly divine things, or even the just so strange things that they might as well be magic, right? Um, and then interestingly, he gets through the forest and he gets to the sea, and then he finds basically what are described basically to be zombies. Right? These are people just picking in the wastes of previous civilizations. And there's a really great line where he says, "I'm sure we'll bring this in when we get to Nietzsche," but he says that the heir to the last man is not the primate but the zombie. This was written in 1977. Zombies weren't massively big yet, and this was long before Nick Land wrote about sort of the end of capitalism, turning people into zombies. This may even be before Day of the Dead, when you have that famous scene. The whole thing takes place in a mall, and lots of people made the reference to that, to the zombies being zombified consumers. But anyway, the point is that he gets to the sea and he finds this strange group of people that presumably can't even think, right? And very odd, very odd. Why are they on the edge of the forest? Why don't they go into the forest? Are they connected with in any way? And then it just then the story just sort of ends. That part of it anyway about the forest. So Attila's story is interesting, but I can't fully understand it.
I think it's meant to be, as lots of things in this book, that sort of way. What I just sort of realised, though, was that Attila does give a very strange description of the forest, and presumably he'd have quite a good idea about what the forest means, and if they were running away and retreating into the forest as a great hunt, it would be probably Attila who agreed that it was a good idea. But we don't have anyone who represents the catacombs, I don't believe. So if Junger is trying to set up a dichotomy, I think he's also set up characters that are going to be sort of biased towards that. I'm not sure how much relevance that has.
It sort of mentions that the Domo would like the catacombs, but you're right. It doesn't really doesn't push the point, right? It's very clear that Attila wants to take him to the forest, and I suspect that the Condor would like to go there too. I don't think he'd have much interest in the catacombs, and of course Martin wants to go there too. It is interesting that the Condor actually goes there. Like he actually abandons Eumeswil. That's what I think. That's what makes me think that yeah, his power was basically slipping. I don't see any reason why he'd just up and leave on such a long, perilous journey, right? I mean, obviously he must have known that the second he left, the city would fall. So something's going on, right? And it's interesting again that Martin doesn't go by himself, right? He goes with the Condor, this tyrant. He goes with him, kind of like it's even mentioned. He's kind of like all the scholars that went with Napoleon to Egypt on this incredibly perilous journey, which almost got him destroyed too. But yeah, again, like again, just so many questions. Like why did they all go to the forest? I kind of understand why Martin wants to go there. I can kind of understand why Attila wants to go there, but I don't understand why the Condor goes there, or why he brings so many people, or what he was thinking. But I don't understand what the forest is to begin with fully. I think I kind of know what it represents, but yeah, so many questions. But what do you think?
I mean, considering how much hunting has been sort of put into the novel without too much done with it, especially in the first chapter when Martin sort of says there isn't much difference between the prey and the hunter, and especially with Martin's surname, Venator, meaning hunter, I'm starting to think there might be some incentive to hunt in the forest, to almost try to defy or kill gods, but I don't think there's too much evidence for that, but I'm still wondering if hunting is in some way linked to them going to the forest.
It could be. I always saw just the hunt as just a cover story, but you're right. It could be meant in a much more interesting way, right? It could be they're going into this magical, mystical place to hunt, the greatest animals and like you say, try and find the strangest things they can. It could be pure curiosity, right? I mean, it could be even Prometheus going in to get the fire, right? I mean, this could be something of this kind of story, right? Where they're going to get something. And remember, they're going to come back, right? I mean, this it's been a couple of years and none of them have came back yet, but that doesn't mean that the story ends there. The Condor could return from the forest in a very very different way. Uh, Totally changed man with all kinds of things, right? Maybe strange powers or strange animals. Certainly, Attila came back from the forest a much wiser, more I would say more powerful man, right? It's certainly had an effect on him. So maybe that's just maybe I mean he's it's kind of implied that he's been mentioning the forest over many years, but never giving proper details on it. So it's possible that the curiosity just got the better of the Condor, and he had to see it. He had to go to this place. He's the great Condor, right? I mean, it wouldn't do for him not to try his hand in the forest. But yeah, I do. I certain for Martin though, I do think that it is both obviously curiosity, but there's something more in his journey to the forest. It's more than just. It's more than escape. It's more than just historical curiosity. The forest represents something. I think personally it represents a path for the future. Again, the catacombs versus the forest, and it's kind of implied, that there's sort of this division, right? Vigo for the forest, Bruno for the catacombs, Attila for the forest, the Domo for the catacombs, maybe Martin for the forest, and Ingrid for the catacombs. That's one of his lady friends. uh, so yeah, it seems to be this division again in humanity, right? Well, what you're going to choose? Are you going to choose this technological future? Or are you going to choose this land of primal beasts and magical, mystical? Again, it's almost like the difference between Vigo and Bruno's philosophies, right? There's been this dichotomy running through the entire book, where Vigo is a little more fluid. He's a little more meta historical. He's a little more mythical. While someone like Bruno is much more. You know, he likes mercantile societies. He likes Venice. He likes Genoa. He likes learning very specific things about them. He's still an imaginative man, and he's not like Kiss Muller, but there's clearly a difference in form between Bruno and Vigo, which perhaps mirrors the difference between the forest and the catacombs. So I do think that this climax of the novel is sort of the climax of the thought, the division in thought between many of the characters we've seen, and of course, uh, Martin himself has sort of oscillated between these 2 points, right? I mean, he never says whether he prefers Vigo or Bruno, but it seems in the end he does choose the forest.
To move this on to our next subject, and well, to link this onto our next subject, and one I'm not entirely versed on, but we've sort of put on thought of the citizens of Eumeswil as the last man, and in some ways you can definitely draw some parallels to, I guess, a nihilistic way of thinking, I guess, to loosely, hopefully put it. So, your sort of idea about this sort of breaking the cycle, this dichotomy, I'm starting to think that it might be Jünger almost claiming there are two ways to become the sort of Ubermensch, to overcome Eumeswil, the sort of forest, the gods, myth, belief. You can either hold yourself toward, oh, you can either base yourself off those sorts of beliefs, or you can base yourself on technology and progression, and starting to believe that might be something that's supposed to be reflected in this work. That's from Nietzsche's work as well.
Yeah, yeah. I wish I spoke German so that I could read a lot of his texts. There's a bunch I still haven't read, even in English. As I said, I've never actually read the proper forest passage. I need to get to that soon. But yeah, definitely throughout his work, there's always been a strange, both a dichotomy, but also an attempt, I think, to mix, I guess, what you could call biology and physics, right? Or you could almost call it alchemy and chemistry. It's kind of seen in the Glass Bees a little bit, which it's a good book. It's nowhere near this quality, but in that book, there's sort of like a Walt Disney character, or like a I guess like Elon Musk character in modern speak, who has sort of managed to make technology to the point where it performs almost biological needs. He has these I mean, it's called the glass bees, and he has these in his garden. He has these glass bees, literally, that collect honey, and they behave, very much like normal bees. And he makes animatronic humans as well that are so lifelike that people fall in love with them, and when they realize they can't have them, they commit suicide because they're so perfect. And it's I need to reread it, but very strange things, and this biological technological duality and possibly uh, coming together at one point definitely goes throughout his work, and maybe the forest and the catacombs would come together one day. But he definitely felt that there's different paths coming for humanity. I mean, he famously tried drugs, right? He was one of the first people to ever try LSD. He's experimented with all kinds of strange plants, uh, biology, botany, and of course, he was very familiar with technology. He fought against it basically in the First World War. Uh, so you're definitely right that he's definitely seeing something in humanity's future where it's either going to have to choose, or these two things are going to mix in such a way that they'll basically herald the return of magic, basically. And like technology will get so advanced that it'll mix with biology in strange ways that who knows, right? I mean, it doesn't. His early work definitely seems more skeptical about this, right? I mean, humanity's heading for disaster, but then he seems to sort of walk that back later on, and you see it in texts like this, right? I mean, we'll go through a world state and everything will break apart, and there'll be all this hell, but the forest will come back, and it'll come back stronger than ever, and technology will move in these strange ways. Maybe we'll have glass bees, which that doesn't seem so bad to me. I mean, all they do is collect honey, and they're quite beautiful things, so no problem there. So yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily about over sort of becoming the Ubermensch, but it certainly is a path forward.
Well, yeah, I just dropped my book. Well, I'll tell you what I do think it's about. Really, I think, um, when you think of Eumeswil and the little stagnancy that they have, that the people have, right? You could almost kind of imagine like hunting as the complete opposite of that, right? There is nothing Eumesville like about hunting, right? And then it's very telling that when you want to hunt, you go outside the city, right? If like here, if you want to hunt, you're still in society, right? And then in the wild, you just hunt, but you don't like actually leave, like you don't actually go off grid, right? So I think it's very telling that the hunting is done outside Eumesville, right? Now, I think we can, infer as to what Eumesville is. Is it magical? Is it radioactive? Huge dinosaurs, weird plants. What is it? I think it is supposed to represent like a blank slate. That's what it is, really. Um, Kind of like a, um, like like into the unknown, right? From here, you're like once you step out into the unknown, you're gonna have to hunt for your future. You're gonna have to take the initiative for your future. I think that's what it means, really. So just for a poetic um, impact, like Jünger very well could have described a few people who came from the forest, right? Attila and some other hypothetical people, and he could have uh, attributed to them different backstories, and it would have all made sense because that's what they made of the blank slate. Assuming that the blank slate theory, my blank slate idea is correct. Now, what was I saying? Yes, 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 yes. So the other thing about I want to mention is, you know, in in like I said, right, in the beginning of the recording, there was no beginning, middle, and end. Uh, there's like a big prologue. That's like the uh, first dozen chapters, or for several chapters, sorry, and then there's the ending. The final three chapters. There's the ending. None of the chapters in the prologue, when I say prologue, put it in quotation marks. None of the chapters in the prologue actually have a plot line, right? It's really, here's what it's like. Here are the characters. Here's how I think. Here's how Oimizo is like. Never really gets into any story format. And then we get to the forest. So it could almost be like, you could almost look at it like, there is no story to be found on Oimisville, right? Oimisville is that dead. It is that full of last man that you can't have a story. The story starts when you leave it, and when you leave it, it's your own story, and it's up to you to guess because it's a blank slate, right? It has that like romantic the like to quote Dr. Emmett Brown, the future is whatever you make it, so make it a good one. It has that kind of hopeful vibe to it, right? I think that's kind of beautiful, but the point is, um, when he escapes into the forest, that's like a metaphor for Martin having to put to test everything that he talked about, right? For the first several chapters, he was talk, talk, and talk, right? He explains this, he explained that, he explained the Luminar, the professors, the universities, the society, the governments, all that. Now, once he is in the forest, he has to really put into test because he cannot rely. He talks about needing authority. He cannot rely on authority. He cannot rely on order. He cannot rely on government. He has to take it upon himself. And so, really, it's not only just a blank slate where anything can happen, but it's also a test where Martin has to make sure that what he wants to happen happens, and that's really when the story starts. So maybe you could even say so we know that it's not a beginning, middle, and end, and I did say that it's a context and then end, like a prologue and then end. But we could also say it's a prologue then the beginning. Like, and really, I mean, maybe this is just me being very hopeful, but that's how I like to think of it, really.
Well, I certainly like the idea that the story only starts when you leave Eumeswil. I think that's definitely true. Eumeswil is a Eumeswil is a fossilized place. There's really no stories you can tell there that haven't been told.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that was definitely something that I hadn't thought about. Eumeswil as a blank slate, Eumeswil as a test, and that the true story comes after you leave. And when I originally read the last bit, I sort of found it as cyclic, as sort of more evidence that it's gonna be it's gonna go back to tyranny. That there's the people from the islands, they've come in and swapped with the Caspar's sort of minions, and sort of the Anarch, the person outside of this society, vanished. So I did kind of feel like it was going to be cyclic again. But of course, stepping in here, they've put plenty against that, and I think a really good point is that the true story, is not cyclic. There is going to be a true story afterwards.
Well,
That,
I'll go ahead, go ahead.
oh, there, go on.
All right. Well, we throughout the book we always talk about transcending, right? We talk about goal transcending. We talk about what exists. I mean, in the last chapter we talked about, not in the last chapter, in the last week or the week before that we talked about uh, being in the Heideggerian sense, order and chaos, and then transcending that, right? And then we talked about how you can't just oscillate into the sweet spot between order and chaos, but you have to transcend that in and of itself. You have to go beyond it. You have to go beyond, like gold, you have to go beyond the state, right? You have to go beyond whatever context that you find yourself in. It's very possible that he never went to the forest at all. I mean, he did initially, but it's very possible that like it's implied that he is still alive outside the forest, or somewhere beyond the forest, um, because yeah, and which would mean that he transcended um, Eumeswil and the forest, right? We don't know if we left the forest in the first place, but what is for certain is that he transcended Eumeswil. Every It's like mobility to mobility, right? Changing with change from 20,000 leagues under the sea. everywhere you go, you kind of have to keep improving, or else you're going to be sucked down, like um, uh, like um, like the rest of Eumeswil. And Elliot, you talked about gold, right? You talked about how gold is a metaphor for um, uh, transcending. And well, really, it's very um, it's very telling that. Sorry about that. It's very telling that we don't even hear the word anarch in the last few chapters, because well, it's kind of implied that he transcended us too. So not only is it a blank slate, not only is it um, the anarch in action, but it's also the anarch has transcended the book itself almost, right? It's very meta. Like he transcended Eumesville the city, but he also transcended Eumesville the book that we hold in our hands. So it's very meta. I might be reading too much into it, but I want to hear what you guys think.
I mean, possibly that's quite an interesting thought you have there. I didn't even realise, as you said, the Anarch isn't really mentioned in the last few chapters at all. But
Yeah, it's kind of it's kind of implied that he achieves something at the very end, right? Like literally the last part of this book is him achieving a sort of a perfect separation of his body from his mind, his mirror image from his actual image, right? He actually has to be revived by his Chinese friend who finds him lying on the floor, unconscious, and he achieves such a separation that he was able to burn himself in the head with a candle and not feel any pain. So something was going on there where he sort of achieved some total separation of his being from his body. Maybe he's mastered the form of the anarch. He can now sort of almost separate himself even from himself. So interesting.
Yeah, 100%, right? And um, really, I mean, it really is to me like a big aha moment where we don't even hear the word mentioned. We don't even hear the word anarch mentioned a lot, and it almost seems like mm, what I could see also is, instead of the anarch transcending beyond um the the Martin, you could also see, when we've been talking about the anarch for the last 3 weeks, right? We talked about it as this like entity within you, right? It's that authentic self inside of you. But it's also, what if the anarch is much more than that? What if the anarch is something that's present in not just every person but every thing? And what I mean is, it's how, if I'm using the term correctly, it's how the subject uh, perceives the object, right? So it's how he conceptualizes the world around him, and when he does that, surely that he's imposing himself onto others almost, right? We're getting into idealism a bit, but not really, but sort of, and he's kind of imposing himself onto others, right? When I'm talking to you guys, I'm imposing what I think of you onto you, right? So what I think of you might be very different from who you are. Who you think of yourself, how you think of yourself might be different from who you are as well. And maybe that who you really are is the anarch, but it could also be found in, in actual objects, right? So if I really like reading, then maybe the anarch is found in that, right? If it's my vocation, it's my life's purpose, intrinsic purpose, then maybe that's where the anarch is. And it almost seems like, just reading through. How did I get to this theory? Well, reading through the book, not only was the anarch not mentioned, but I mean, again, I might be reading too much into this, but when he was talking in the a day in the city, the chapter in day in the city, he talks to the Chinese guy, the Latifa Ingrid. He almost seems dead, right? He almost seems um, he doesn't have that scientific analytic vigor to him, right? He's just carried by the wind almost, and maybe because that's Martin talking, right? Maybe that's because it's Martin talking, and the Anarch is no longer there. Well, it is there, but it's also uh, becoming very prominent in the forest, and the Anarch in the his Anarch in the forest and the Anarch within himself slowly connects in some esoteric way. I know I sound really insane right now, but bear with me, man. Bear with me. It kind of connects, and Martin says, "Aha! I no longer belong here. I belong in the forest because that's where uh, I truly flourish as the Anarch." Crazy or what? Is it valid or is it insane?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, he's clearly uh, fading into something. Maybe fading is the wrong word. Maybe transforming into something else, right? He finally achieves this state of total separation right before he goes into the forest. The forest has been mentioned quite a lot in the run up to this moment. He's thinking about it. He's in the Luminar a lot. He's sort of moving between all these historical moments. He's, in a sense, achieving something. He's achieving separation from Eumeswil, from the people around him. While strangely also getting closer to them, right? He's achieving some kind of more primal, less social relationship to these people. He makes love several times to his I believe it's Ingrid. Wait, both of them actually, both his female friends, lady friends, and so we're clearly seeing some evolution in him as a character into something else. That's probably you're right. That's probably part of the reason why he chose the forest. He's transforming into definitely something. Perhaps this is the mirror image, right? This is no longer Martin. Maybe this is, or maybe this is Martin, and he's sort of shedding Emmanuel, or maybe it's vice versa, or maybe they're both coming together. Maybe it's actually now that I think about it, it just flashed into my head that much earlier in the novel, it might have been Bruno, it might have been Vigo, said that primal image is image and mirror image. So maybe in that moment he achieved a total unity of both of these people, both Martin and Emmanuel, and became something more. And then was able then he'll become, and then that's given the strength to go to the forest, or maybe he was called to the forest. Very hard to say, but yeah, I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, what I was going to say is before you sort of start thinking of this sort of merging of persons and almost ideas of the anarch, you first need to argue that, this knight suicidal Martin hasn't just sort of overridden the anarch in some formal way for some reason. Because it seems that Martin has sort of sunk into almost the rabble. He has gone out with, a joy girl, I think it was described earlier, and did make love with a fellow scholar, Ingrid,
Just like his father did. But
and also obeyed the sort of authority of Attila and Condor and went off to the forest.
yeah, I don't I agree, but I wouldn't say it's a falling into the rabble. I think he has, in some sense, perhaps even transcended the anarch. Right? I mean, the anarch, in some sense, was a survival tool. It was something that Martin needed uh, to survive in Eumesville. It's something that kept him safe, kept him sane, kept him thinking, kept him spiritually free. Perhaps and then now he's achieved such a state that he's basically become uh, he's basically become his own king, right? I mean, why did the Condor ask him to go, right? I mean, he's just a bartender. He's a professor to a certain extent, maybe assistant professor at the university, but he's specifically picked as the historian to go with the Condor. That's not an accident, right? He's picked, I think, because the Condor trusts him, possibly because he is the Anarch. He is, you know, he is a monarch just like the Condor, only he's a monarch to himself. I think at the end of this novel, he achieves something. He transcends essentially. He transcends Eumeswil. He transcends all the bullshit, and he leaves it behind and goes to the primal forest to become something better. I think in some sense he transcends the Anarch. He overcomes it.
Yeah. You know what? You know what I think he's doing. You know what I think he's doing. He's not transcending the anarch. He is becoming the anarch once again because um the whole idea behind the anarch is it's very hard to define. It's very hard to put into a box and say, boom, that's the anarch. Boom, there's your definition. Boom, look it up in the dictionary and there it is, right? It's very hard to define it. Um, and so it literally, okay, dude, again, might be reading too much into this, but check it out. What do we hear on the first page, right? What do we hear on the first page? He says, to make the vague more precise, to define the indefinite more and more sharply, that is the task of every development, every hold your horses, every temporal exertion. Now, I don't know what temporal means, but it does sound like temporary, so I'm going to assume that that's what it means. Um, while you guys subsequently inevitably respond to my little chat here, I'm gonna Google what temporal means. But yes, so it's like with this whole giant prologue of several chapters, he's becoming less and less the anarch. That's what's happening here, right? He's becoming less and less the anarch. Remember how I said in the first week that the more you define the anarch, the more you say I want to be the anarch. The more you say, oh man, here's my ideal anarch. I want to become like that. The more you do that, the less it becomes the anarch because the whole point of the anarch is this. It's like this fluid, um uh fluid. You can't draw like you can't draw borders around it kind of thing. You can't draw limits behind it. And when you start defining it, you are drawing limits. But the anarch is limitless. It kind of ties into what I said, where it's beyond what's in you. It's in everywhere, right? The anarch is like completely without borders or limits, and so really, um, he is by going into the forest, he is not only freeing Eumesville, but he's freeing the caricature of the anarch that he drew of himself, right? So when he explains the anarch, he um, he uh, is ironically becoming less of what he's explaining, right? It's almost like oh, I'm actually gonna do a video on this later in the year. But what's the first and second rule of Fight Club, right? Well, um, the more you break that rule, the more you're going against the spirit of Fight Club, which is fighting, right? The more you talk about Anarch, the more you are going against the spirit of it, which is pure, authentic, uh, present being that transcended chaos and order. When you're trying to put it into the definition, you are stucking yourself into order back again. So really, he transcended uh, almost though he transcended chaos and order. He transcended so many things, but he did not transcend the anarch. Because the more you transcend chaos and order, government, state, Eumesville, all that, it's not that you transcend the anarch, but it's that you become the anarch once again.
Yeah, maybe this is a good time to bring in Stirner, right? Because we're back on the Anarch and his idea of uh, the one and only one. What is it? The only one, which is
The only one, the ego, the unique.
mm-hmm. We'll just call it the only one. I think just I don't think he gives it a proper name, but we'll just call it the only one. Uh,
which yeah is kind of like a proto anarch, right? And what you're saying there about the anarch being boundless, right? I mean, it can become any possibility. It's just this kind of raw primal freedom which every man has, and of course it would take different forms in different places. It takes the form of Martin in Eumeswil, Martin the bartender, Martin the professor, but of course Martin in the forest, Martin the historian, traveling with the condor would definitely become something different, and certainly Martin in any other society would look quite different than he looks in Eumesville. But and it may even change depending on your character, right? He sort of describes the difference between the warrior and the soldier, right? We sort of had this discussion, so it's definitely something that takes on different forms and different shapes. And one of the forms it takes was Stirner, right? I mean, he sort of realized this power at a very interesting time. There's a very long section of the previous part, which we never got to last week, which goes on about Germany in 1845. Basically, what he calls the Christian period, 1845 to 1945, which is an odd choice for the Christian period, but I think I get what he's saying. And because it was sort of the death of the Christian period, really, but it was certainly the time of the Christian states, anyway, Christian nation states. But yeah, Stirner comes out of this period with this radical ego, right? He comes out with this radical sense of, sorry, this radical sense of freedom. He senses it, right? He hasn't yet formed into a coherent doctrine or anything with the kind of depth, perhaps, of the Anarch, but Stirner was also realizing at this time that there is something, there is like the main freedom is the freedom of yourself and the possibilities within yourself. I wrote it down somewhere. Oh, here they are. Here, the two rules of Stirner. That is not my business. Rule number one. Rule number two is nothing is more important than I. It's kind of a radical selfishness, uh, which got him absolutely hated, understandably to a certain extent. And he was detested by Marx and Engels in real life. This is Stirner, and I don't know too much about him myself, so I don't wanna ramble too long about someone I don't know an incredible amount about. But yeah, he ties in with Nietzsche as well, right? Because he's writing actually before Nietzsche, which is interesting. But he's sort of capturing this idea that would be mentioned or taken up maybe. Actually, Junger actually mentions that when you hit a certain period, right, you can say, oh, so and so stole this idea from somebody else, but Nietzsche probably never even read Stirner. Very little people read him during his time, but certain ideas just soak into a time, and they spring up everywhere like weeds or trees.
Like the
And
Anarch.
exactly, yeah, exactly. And so Stirner is sort of one of these people that very early grasps this primal power that's sort of coming out in this period, this radical freedom, these radical possibilities, and he turns it in his own way to what I said, radical selfishness, while maybe Junger turns it towards political survival and historical contemplation. That's certainly how he lived, and that's certainly how Martin lives. But again, it can take many different forms. But yeah, what's your guys' thoughts on Stirner?
Well, I wouldn't be so quick to say that Stirner didn't develop the concept of the only one or the ego or the unique, however we call it, as much as Junger. Junger definitely didn't dive into the Stirner's concept as well, but we don't know how well Stirner dives into it. Now, you did mention the two cardinal rules, which is as it is not my business and nothing more important than I. Be careful of how you interpret my business, right? And you say it's selfishness, right? Like the self, like so. If we take into the context of Martin, well, it's Martin's business, right? No, no, no. I don't think it's Martin's business, but it is tapping in. Instead, it's tapping into something within Martin. So something like the Anarch, if not completely the Anarch. Now, how do I infer from this? Well, it says everything should be my business, but never my business. Okay, now when if you're listening to this, you're not gonna be like, I'm sorry, what? Because I just said should be my business, but never my business. Well, okay, if you read the book, right? If you read Eumeswil, um, it literally the first time it says should be my business, the M is small case. The next time it says never my business, it should be it is capital, right? And James, when you pointed out the cardinal rules, it was that is not my business. It had the capital M. Now I'm going to assume here that oh yeah, by the way, I googled temporal. Temporal does mean temporary, but yeah, like I'm going to assume here that when he says that is not my business. Now again, I haven't read Stirner, all right. I was told to read Phenomenology of Spirit first before reading Ego on its own, so I'm gonna have to get through Phenomenology first because apparently the Ego on its own is like a rebuttal of Phenomenology of Spirit. Anyways, when he says that is not my business, he is basically saying that is not the business of something that resembles the anarch, right? Like you could definitely like you could definitely see Junger saying that is not the business of the anarch because nothing is the business of the anarch. It's the business of the person wrapped around the anarch. It's the business of everything is the business of um, um, Martin, right? So Martin would say, yes, everything is my business, but nothing is my business, right? Everything is the business of Martin, but nothing is the business of the anarch. Everything is the business of me, but nothing of for the only one. The only one you could definitely see is like a um uh that kind of like transcendent entity. Now that part is a conjecture. I don't know. Um, I've started reading the prologue for Phenomenology Spirit, and it is very daunting. So yeah, I if, so really I because I don't understand um, phenomenology or the ego yet. Um, I can't really, like you said, James. I can't really make any definite claims, but just from the hints that Junger gave us, the M, the capital M, my, definitely points to something beyond the self or super within the self, the indefinite and the vague.
Yeah, I'm not. I've read a little bit of Hegel. I'm not a big fan of Hegel. I think he's quite terrible. There's a line in here where Junger says all roads led to Hegel, and he's talking basically about yeah, he's basically talking, and he's right there. I mean, a lot of thinkers of the 20th century unthinkingly drew from Hegel, particularly Marx, and then his followers. Basically, in a quick rundown, uh, Hegel created basically the idea of dialectics, right? That ideas sort of bounce back and forth between people. We have these great debates, and then we have synthesis and then we draw conclusions from them, and that's how things advance. And of course, Marx took this and ran with it to make dialectical materialism, where he says that actually what drives society is the back and forth clashes between classes, not ideas. And there's some truth in that. Marx does deserve a credit for sort of taking or realizing many years before, I think some better thinkers like Bergson uh, realized that there is material things, including actual humans in the world and their actions, dictate things just as much, or perhaps even more, than sort of these intellectual ideas. But other than that, I have no particular love for Hegel. He's a bit like Kant. He's one of these. I mean, Kant's much more interesting, but Hegel, another one of these people that just sort of builds these gigantic systems. Right? I mean, you're right. Phenomenology of Spirit is a very daunting book. All of Hegel is super daunting. He's he's a professor's dream. Right? He's just thousands of big texts of books for professors to learn and regurgitate and never say anything interesting. Uh, uh, he's worth learning, though. I mean, if you're going to do a book on him, he's still worth learning because, of course, his ideas were very influential. He himself, I don't find particularly interesting, but yeah, that's why I like Stirner here because yeah, I mean Stirner again prefiguring Nietzsche, who also hated Hegel. So did Schopenhauer, I think quite rightly, uh, because all of them sort of realized that no, Hegel's just building this nonsense It's all bloody nonsense. It's just a big. I don't want to use any foul language, but he's building something just for his own amusement, basically, and for professors to enjoy. Uh, some of it interesting, but yeah. And then Stirner, of course, comes along, and it's just like, no, no man, this is saying it. Uh, and he creates the idea of the ego as being, the prime uh, central force to which everything will revolve around. Right? There is just me. I am alone in the world. There is only me, which is definitely true. And of course, that's what Nietzsche would pick up as well and run with. Right? There's only man. And then, of course, he pursues it to man must surpass himself. While uh, when I was talking about selfishness, it's just a vibe I get off from Stirner. This could be unfair. He had a very troubled history. One could almost see him making this ideology purely to justify his terrible actions in life. But I shouldn't do that. That's a terrible way to judge thinkers. But uh, yeah, very interesting though. And he creates this idea of the ego. When you were saying there about the anarch, uh, everything being my business and nothing being my business. Was that the quote again? Sorry, I forget.
Yeah, yeah. Everything's my business, but nothing is, but never my business. Um, that was something that Stirner was about, and I didn't say that's the anarch, but I said it's very, it could be it could be something that the anarch could resemble.
Yeah, I think that makes more sense for the anarch because the anarch is kind of historical, or at least Martin is, and that makes sense, right? Because everything is his business, right? All history is his business. He watches the Domo and the Condor and all their doings, right? That's all his business, but it's not his business, right? He's not going to interfere with it. He's not gonna tell the Domo what to do. He's not going to
Mm,
protest them, right? It's
yeah,
his business in an intellectual sense, in a
mm,
historical sense, but it's not his business to
no,
get
no,
involved.
no. Like I don't think that's what. Okay, dude. Again, I haven't read Stirner either, but so I'm just as clueless as you are. But from the vibe I got is everything is his business. So you know how you said he wouldn't interfere? That's not relevant to the fact that it's not his business. No, no, no. It's not the business of the anarch. Like it doesn't touch the anarch. That's what he's saying, right? So even if Martin doesn't interfere, it's still his business. But it's never the business of the anarch. So everything's the business of in ego something like I'm assuming Max Stern will say something like everything's my property, right? But it's never going to touch that unique, undefinable, only one within me. So you could see a definite parallel between Anarch and the ego here, or the only one. Sorry, same thing. Where everything is like nothing. Like the only one and the Anarch transcends it. Right. That's why it's never my business. Like you can't touch me, man. Like I'm that much above you. Like I am everywhere and nowhere. You can't like nothing is my business. Like history is not my business, but history is my business. Right. Government isn't my business, but government is my business. So it's not like everything that's like superficial, like my self, um, it is my business. Everything's my business to my superficial self. Nothing's the business of the anarch or the only one. That's the vibe that I got. I don't think the fact that he doesn't interfere, I don't think that's a sign that it's not his business. I think it's still his business, and because it's his business, he's not interfering.
It could be. It could be. Yeah, I was getting a slightly different vibe. I was thinking of it like because Stirner again. Bizarrely I know him historically more than I know him his writings. But like again, he hated Marx and Engels and these sort of political systems that they built, and I kind of see him as him saying, it's his. But he never he always was with them, right? He was always at these bars and these taverns and these cafes, surrounded by them and their ideas and all this stuff. So I'm kind of wondering if yeah, the vibe I was getting was like that uh, all this stuff he swims in, right? He swims in this history, these theories, right? It's his business. Anything in the world can be his business because he's so free. He can involve himself in anything basically, but never get sucked into it, right? He'll never it'll never become his job in a way, to use his business in a different sense, right? His business is, and he's in charge of it. He has to run it. Uh, but I mean, these are different ways of looking at it, and yeah, who knows, right? We'll have to read Stirner someday.
Yeah. So like again, I haven't read Hegel either, right? But building off of that, what is my business, what is not my business, right? And what is like what Hegel is about from the secondhand sources, like the unwritten rule in here in from what I heard is that it's if you're gonna read Hegel, start with like some secondary source, right, like some kind of companion guide, and from these sources, like when Hegel talks about ideas, right, you said how it's ideas bounce each other back and forth, and that's how like the progress is made, right? I think it's more than just ideas in that sense, right? Um, you know how like materialism and being materialistic is different. Like materialistic is like being obsessed with superficial money, where materialism is the view that everything at the fundamental level is made of matter, right? So I think that's like with idealism here. This is just off tangent, sorry. With like it's I don't think it's so much ideas bouncing back and forth, but the manifestations of idealism, meaning like um, concepts as the fundamental entity that surrounds life. That's that's the fundamental thing. So it's the idea behind the material, right? It's the um, um, it's how you conceive. So like again, like there's you, right? There's you, I'm talking to you, but there's also my conception of you, right? There's who I think you are versus who you are. That's I don't know, don't quote me on it. um oh, we start Hegel in March, so if anyone's listening and you want to hop in, the Discord link in the description box. Anyways, yes. So anyways, going back to the topic, yeah, we are past the 1 hour mark, so I'm glad that we're talking about Stirner and Nietzsche, because we agreed to talk about the context here a bit. um do you guys find any he never really goes into Nietzsche, does he? He goes a lot more into Stirner. And if you read his Wikipedia page or whatever, it definitely says that like he drew more influence from Stirner, so it makes sense. But I'm also seeing a lot of Nietzsche elements in here too. I guess the difference is that Stirner really talked about what he's aiming for, right? And while Nietzsche did talk about what he's aiming for, which is the Ubermensch, um, or the child, right? Um, Jünger doesn't really point at that, right? Jünger doesn't really point at the child and the Ubermensch more. He kind of points at like what Nietzsche is trying to be against, which is the last man of society, the camels, the the afterworldly, the all too many, the rabble, the all too human, all that jazz. So I think I think that's why Nietzsche wasn't mentioned a lot. But I do think that just as you can draw parallels between the Only One and the Anarch, you can draw parallels between Ubermensch and the Anarch as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that Nietzsche is only sort of sporadically mentioned. I think later Jünger moved away from Nietzsche quite a bit. I've sort of mentioned this before, so I won't go into it too much about the difference between the two sort of periods of Junger's work. But yeah, yeah, I like when he calls him old gunpowder head, which is that's a fair statement about Nietzsche. But I like Nietzsche a lot. But yeah, old gunpowder head is sort of a good term for him. He was always going off, always exploding. Uh, Certainly, a lot of gunpowder would be exploded over his ideas. But maybe that's not fair too, actually. But anyway, yeah, there was sort of the only mention I can remember of him was where that quote I give about how the last man's sort of the next version, the heir to the last man is not the primate, right? It's not going to be some sort of return to monkey or whatever. It's going to be basically zombies that can't even use tools, right? I mean,
Which is like
again, these
post-human,
people.
right? It's like after human almost. Monkeys before
Yeah,
human.
yeah. It's interesting that they were around the forest. I don't know. I'm not sure of that. They're at the coast, and it's described that pirates come just to test their weapons on them, right? And so, I mean, do they even run? I mean, and he says they can't even use tools, right? They just whatever fits in their hand, they just use to poke and trash. No understanding. Yeah, post-human is a good word for it, right? I mean, it's even an animal, knows to run when someone's shooting at them. So very strange. That's terrifying, right? I mean, literal zombies. Very scary, even if they don't infect other people with biting, right? It's ideas that infect them, maybe, or lack of them. That would be an interesting horror movie. Zombies that spread because of ideas. But yeah, I can't think of too many other mentions of Nietzsche in this last part. Yeah, he's been around the book, of course, here and there. And of course, we've described Eumeswil as being in the state of the last man, uh, or maybe even like maybe a late last man, right? He's not quite so comfortable. He needs a little bit of violence here and there. Sort of a more mature description, I think we said, of the last man, where he's not quite just so happy and jolly, but he needs a little bit of violence and a little bit of revolution to sort of stop him getting bored. Maybe, and then maybe without that they become zombies. Who knows? But yeah, Stirner and Nietzsche. Stirner comes out the better, I think. Certainly in this book, as far as ideas go. The last man is sort of just used as a stick to sort of beat the idea of some of the people in Eumesville. Uh, we mentioned that maybe the forest or the catacombs could sort of transcend the last man, maybe make the Ubermensch, but we're not certain about that. That's just our reading into it. So I can't think of, unless you guys know something else, maybe I'm forgetting. I can't think of too much else to say on Nietzsche here.
In chapter 43, or 42 rather, back in, which would have been in the huge chapter, Junger did make two sort of distinctions between the sort of Ubermensch and the only one. I can read out some quotes if you'd like me to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
100%.
please go ahead.
The Superman recognizes the world as a will to power. There is nothing else. Even art is a will to power. The Superman joins in the rivalries of the world, while the only one is content to watch the spectacle. He does not strive for power. He dashes neither after nor ahead of it, because he possesses it and enjoys it in a self-awareness. That, that definitely from Junger is trying to say that the only one is closer to the Anarch than the Ubermensch, in my mind.
Oh yeah, definitely. We because in another situation, he said that the power is not the goal of the anarch. Power is the anarch's property. So it's something that he already has. He's not trying to like fill that void of power. So yeah. I think you're right. The only one definitely is closer to the anarch than the Superman, which then raises the question, why does Junger even mention the Superman or the? I mean, I'm gonna call him Ubermensch. Okay, it sounds a lot cooler. Why is the Ubermensch even mentioned? Like, it could be just to it could be just to clarify some things, right, for the reader. Like the reader could be like, all right, man, you're mentioning a lot of these Nietzsche and last man stuff, so obviously the anarchist Ubermensch, right? And then Junger's like, well, actually, yes, but no. It could be that, or it could be Ubermensch does have some similarities, and then he so enough so that he has to add it in. I will ask though, what exactly do they mean by will to power? Um, is it because like art is something that's to my mind dead? Maybe they didn't think that, or maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way. Do they mean that like everything that exists is striving towards power? Because my, I mean, I can't say it's my philosophy because you can't really create any philosophy in this day and age. But in my worldview, the way I see it, power is, because it's like the potential to become or to be. Power is inherent in everything, right? It's inherent in everything. So if something exists, it already has power, right? It has capitalized on that potential to be, which is power. So I think to me everything is self-justifying, right? Why did you hop on this conversation? Because you had the power to. So it's self-justifying, right? To me, might makes right. It doesn't mean that might is right, but it means that might, which isn't just strictly limited to brute force, but power in general, that is what makes that is the precondition for all that is right, right? It's a substitute for what's ethically right. So yeah, that's how I see power. I do not see entities as striving towards power, but maybe I'm just like misinterpreting Nietzsche here because I always viewed will to power as a conscious striving towards power, which is not something that the anarch or the only one is too fond of. Do you guys know what he means by will to power?
Yeah, you were almost spot on with that last sentence, but it's the will to power is basically an unconscious will to power, right? It's a desire that Nietzsche constantly refers to it as a commanding and obeying, right? He loves to use phrases that have double meanings, and when we're talking about commanding and obeying, we're literally talking about obeying yourself, obeying your own will to power, which is your own drive to life. And Nietzsche takes this from Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer built this system which was called the will to life, which basically came out of evolution. And he came up with this idea, which is pretty clever, but which is basically that all life is driven by basically. This is slightly before the theory of evolution was published, but we again we're talking earlier about how ideas are sort of felt before they're actually pronounced, and the idea of evolution was certainly felt before Darwin finally published it. But Schopenhauer sort of had this idea that there was a will to life in everything that sort of drove it to live and to act. And then Nietzsche took this and said, no, no, it's not this sort of mechanical drive of what we later call evolution. It's the will to power, right? Everything has this desire to have power and to have power over other things and to increase its own power. And this is primal in a way, right? It's almost pre-biological or biological, or depending on how you read them. Uh, but this is what the will to power is, and it's a commanding and obeying, right? Because you have to obey yourself, right? Your own desires, and that's why he attacks Christianity and stuff, because he sort of sees it as getting in the way of this, right? It says, no, no, don't listen to your desires, don't listen to your will to power, don't obey yourself, obey God, or uh, don't do these evil things. And Nietzsche says, no, no, there's only life, there's only this will to power that drives us to do grand things that increase our power, and that's basically what it is. Now, when you get to art, the will to power in art, now that's interesting. I wouldn't I don't subscribe to the will to power as far as I can, you know, criticize Nietzsche, the genius, the man himself, right? I mean, uh, but when it gets to art, I don't know. I don't see art as just trying to increase one's own power, right? I mean, there's something different there. There's something uh, transcendental. There's something godly in it, or mixed up with time and beauty and aesthetics and being and all these things that will to power can't simply explain. But I guess in Nietzsche's eye, it would be in Nietzsche's mind, it would be uh, art as an expression of this desire for power, which is again not something that is conscious, right? It's something that drives life, he would say.
The more we sort of dip into this, the more I'm starting to think sort of the Anarch, the Only One, and the Ubermensch, their worlds almost center around them. They're almost like three different forms of projecting an inward self in terms of an existentialist, an egoist, and someone with supreme freedom. So I think the main reason why Stirner and Nietzsche wrap it up is to try to make that nuanced difference that sets apart the Anarch.
Yeah, well, they're all three responses to the same problem, right? I mean, that's sort of
Yeah.
what philosophy is. It's encountering. If you take Deleuze's idea of what philosophy is, which I think is perfect. It's we encounter or perhaps even create these problems right in the world, and then we philosophize to try and create new concepts that allow us to solve them, right? And Stirner writes in 1845. Nietzsche is writing a little bit later, and of course Junger a little bit later too. But they're all dealing with the same problem, which is that you know God is dead, or you could even take it slightly bigger, right? And you could say that this we've entered into this new technological, hyper social, connected world of machines and less gods uh, and science and all these you know what I'm talking about, all these things. And how do we exist in that world, right? I mean, you can try to rule it as the Ubermensch, you can try and surpass man, you can become like Stirner, and you can try and rule yourself. You can become like the Anarch and hide yourself in your freedom, or you can flaunt it, or all these things we've discussed already. But yeah, they're all of them are responding to this problem, and they all were right. I mean, Kant is trying to make space for belief, and Kierkegaard is trying to revive faith and belief, and Hegel's making these crazy systems, and then Marx is trying to try and create some sort of mechanical utopia on Earth and solve all the materialist problems. And people are running around creating phenomenologies like Heidegger and spirit and return to monkey, return to the Greeks, all people trying to solve the same problem. And yeah, we get a million different ideas, and some of them are pretty good, like the Anarch and the Ubermensch.
Yeah, that's probably a good way of putting it. I believe Jünger also agrees with that as well, because he refers to the God is Dead proclamation by Nietzsche as unveiling a universal awareness. So I think there's definitely some truth to what you said there.
And it's still a project that's going on, right? I mean, we're doing this right now, right? I mean, Kohei, you're doing this, all these series and making things, and we're still continuing on that same struggle, essentially, that that Junger was in and Nietzsche was in. And, like, I mean, it's the same thing. It's the same project, right? We're picking up the pages and we're writing a little bit extra.
Yeah, and yeah, we are doing it. Um, and like you said, man, there's like a bunch of these different solutions, and you mentioned how the anarch is one of them. Well, I mean, you could also think of the anarch as a solution to the problem, which is that there are so many freaking solutions, right? It's yeah,
That's true. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a
because
good way of putting it.
because um the anarch himself, I mean Junger didn't come up with the anarch until what um went through six different Germany he went through six different Germanys in his life, five by the time he wrote the Anarch, Eumeswil, sorry. So yeah, if we take his life, right, like he had a revolutionary, fundamental revolutionary government change once every 16 years, right? So yeah, once every 16 years, it's a new revolution. Um, so like, and you could think of each of these German incarnations as the solutions, right? It's um so uh like the the idealism and the materialism is to our philosophical problems what all these government changes are to our more basic problems, for lack of a better word. And by creating so many solutions, that in itself became a problem. So um, the anarch might have been a solution to the fact that we have so many solutions, and that's a problem, right? There's a real, you definitely see a um, political apathy in Junger. Um, like you could almost say that his experiments with drugs, with science, right? Right, science isn't very political, right? It's so you could almost see it as some kind of escapism, right? I mean, he like you know I want to be a reactionary conservative. Oh, look where that ended up. Look where that ended up. So I'm just gonna stick to the science and the drugs, and um maybe maybe the anarch is like a more mature um um formulation of that where it's like, okay, well, I mean, I could only get drugged up for so long that some I'm gonna have to go back into the real world. But the real world is it is this dichotomy of one God, which is technology, right? So everything's unified now under a globalized context, right? The world is more interconnected. It's becoming one and one and more, one and more and more and more. However, it seems as the days goes, there are different solutions as the days as time goes on, right? In the beginning, there was this like your the culture that you grew up in, right? But now different cultures, different systems, politically and philosophically, all these different things. So under the homogeneous, globalized technological world in which language is decaying, right? Technology, government, and language. These are the three problems that you pointed out. Under that one entity, there are a myriad of different um, um, solutions popping up, and the anarch simultaneously confronts both of them.
Yeah, exactly. Junger's kind of I think Junger's right to be skeptical of philosophical and political systems, certainly by the mid 20th century, and we should be too. But he's waiting, right? I think that's part of what the anarch is that you're essentially waiting. And in the novel, of course, he takes the road to the forest. He takes flight to the forest, uh, the escape to the forest, as we said. And in there, we seem to see. I felt like it was implying that there's some future there that's going to be different than what we've seen. Uh, seen with the catacombs, and that's basically what Junger was doing too, right? I mean, he retired entirely from politics by the mid 30s, which is amazing when you think about it, because he lived to the 1990s. So like, huge chunk of his life, he was basically the anarch, just writing books like this.
The majority of his
Uh,
life.
yeah, a huge majority of his life, yeah, which is crazy to think. And someone who rubbed shoulders with so many big people, right? He basically just retired entirely to this little. It was he actually lived in the grounds of a castle. He lived in the woodcutters hut, groundskeeper's hut of a massive castle in southern Germany. Very like him, so in character. The house is a museum. I'd love to see it sometime. Uh, Very nice. A Junger museum. Uh, but that's, that's beside the point. But yeah, so he was waiting for something to come, and he obviously expected something to come, and something will eventually come, right? I mean, that which cannot go on forever will end, as the economists like to say, and it's true. This can't go on forever. What it is it going to be the forest? Is it going to be the catacombs? Is it going to be something entirely different? Who knows? But that's part of what the anarch is, and part of what the history of philosophy is, because I feel like, I mean, philosophy basically has just vanished entirely, right? I mean, the last person doing it right now is Slavoj Žižek, and I mean, he hasn't written a serious philosophical work in a very long time, not since the 90s. So like, it's waiting, I think, for a revival, and something like the Anarch, something like what Nietzsche did, something like what Stirner did, where you can just sort of break free of these uh, terrible systems that just trap it in dead thought, uh, which you know we sort of need to get free of that. We need to get free of Kant. We need to get free of Hegel. We need to get free of Marx. We need to get free of even to a certain extent Nietzsche, right? I mean, even Nietzsche said that he didn't really like, at least in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, right? I mean, he Zarathustra himself was not the higher man or the Ubermensch, right? And he didn't really want followers too much. He sort of wanted someone to surpass him and end that system, right? It wasn't supposed to be some sort of doctrine that you'd learn in a university. It's supposed to be a call to life, a call to action. I think all the best philosophers have an element of that. They don't say learn this, learn me. They sort of say go out and create, encounter the world, and sort of build new things. I think the Anarch is a way to get to that, and maybe get beyond Eumesville and get to the forest. We need the forest, and yeah,
Well, you mentioned like we need to get rid of Hegel and Marx. You know who else we need to get rid of? We need to get we need to get rid of Junger, right? We need to get rid of ourselves. We like um not literally, but like in the sense that like we have to like transcend that self and then tap into the anarch, right? So I really like what you pointed out about Zarathustra is he's not the Ubermensch. He is calling on his followers to transcend him, right? One well one repays his master badly if he only remains a pupil, right? That's what Nietzsche said in Zarathustra. Well, like you could definitely get the sense that like you're supposed to like get rid of Junger as well because um, like not even he is the anarch, right? He can explain the anarch to you, and then as we pointed out, if the theory is true, well, the more he describes the anarch, the less of an anarch the anarch is, right? And I guess um, with all these problems, right? With all the different political landscapes, right? Different contexts that you're in. The anarch is somewhere in you, and it's also somewhere everywhere in that sense. And like we said earlier, so um, I guess in the 30s, Junger found his anarch in Germany still. Um, in in 19 in just before 1914, he founded in the French Foreign Legion. Uh, in 1914, he founded in the trenches of France. It's and now likewise Martin found it in the forest, right? And maybe he might found it in the on the beaches with the zombies. Maybe he might find it within the uh, island where all the people go when they're exiled, like the Australians, how they used to be exiled. Um, or he could find it back into the aftermath of Eumeswil. So I guess that's post apocalyptic, right? Post apocalyptic Eumeswil. So the to even say that the anarch is inside of you is limiting, right? The anarch is everywhere, uh, and um, and in a way nowhere. It's you can't really say there's the anarch, right? It's sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, and so we have to get rid of we have to get rid of everything at one point, right? Um, like if you ask if you ask Martin at the beginning of the story, like he's not gonna say that the anarch is in the forest. If you um, ask him at the end of the story, he's not gonna say it's in Eumesville. But it was at one point in the forest. It was at one point in the Eumesville, and so yeah, like it's all about transcending, dude. Like it's again, I've used the word transcend a lot of times on this meeting, and um, as the saying, as Nietzsche puts it, um, when the all too many uses the same words all the time, it kind of loses its significance. And Junger definitely pointed out in the Eumesville, right? You get the rabble rousers and the drivel generators, and you get these people who just decay language, and so they make sense, but they have no meaning, which is the inverse of what Junger said. But I still stand by my opinion. Anyways, yeah, I think Junger is definitely hinting that we don't only just have to transcend Hegel, right? We have to transcend Jungerism as well. Junger has to transcend Junger, and we have to we have to go beyond the fact that uh, all roads leads to Hegel, and we have to make sure that all roads, well, at least one of our road leads to something else, and that something else he found it in the forest, and that road is a blank slate, right? And on that blank slate, that's when you gotta hunt for it, because in Eumesville he was waiting because he can't hunt in Eumesville, right? It's not the anarch's way to hunt in Eumesville, right? The anarch doesn't do that, because the anarch is it's it's like a right time, right place, right time moment, and Eumesville just wasn't the right time and place to hunt. But um, you know, he is the hunter, right? He is Venator. He is the hunter, and so when the forest comes, that's when he truly becomes himself. That's how I take it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like we said. It might have been in the very first episode actually that the anarch is essentially just potentiality, right? It's the potential for basically anything, because it is just a kind of primal freedom, and from that can come a whole host of things. And yeah, that's don't really have too much else to say on it. I think you said it all there pretty much. And yeah, the anarch is just a kind of potential for other things to come, and so is this novel. I mean, this novel is extremely interesting, but it is of itself just it's less. I think we've sort of seen this as we've read it. It's less explaining. It doesn't lay out the anarch too much. It doesn't go into all the details about the forest. This is not something you could sort of dissect perfectly, cut into little pieces, and study. You couldn't quantify it, right? Is what I'm trying to say. You have to sort of take it at its quality. You have to take it the way Vigo would take history. You have to take it not as literal meaning, but you can read potentials into it, right? You can read potentiality into its ideas. It's more of a book for the future, right? It's kind of strange. I mean, just like all good things, it basically sat forgotten for a long time, and then it's sort of had a resurgence now. Hopefully, we're doing something to help that by doing this series. But it sort of came back now when we need it to sort of remind us of both mistakes of the past, but also it's a call to something else. Because the anarch is extremely useful as an idea right now uh, with the way things are, but we can also kind of see that we need to go past the anarch and go to the forest.
Well, I wouldn't be so sure to say we have to go past the anarch and go to the forest. I think if we go to the forest, we become more of the anarch, right? So I guess I would agree with you insofar as we have to go past the our conceptual concept of the anarch. We have to go beyond what we think of the anarch. But I don't think we could ever get beyond the anarch itself, right? Just like how nothing can never be my business, right? Uh, Nothing can never be Ubermensch. I think the anarch is, I hate to say, but it's the and it's the destination, right? It's the end result. But it's a ever changing end result. That's the thing. It's an ever changing end result, right? Sometimes the end, like I said, the end result at the beginning, the end goal at the beginning was the in Eumeswil. Now it's in the forest. So I think it's not so much that you transcend the anarch, but you become the anarch. It's a constant progress in becoming the anarch.
Yeah, you could say it's a constant state of becoming, right? It's never surpassed, but it never actually ends, right? It's very important that this does not. One of the mistakes, the biggest mistake perhaps of philosophy, is imagining an end, right? You have a system, you have an idea, and then you've got it, right? But that's absolutely not true. Everything is always in a state of becoming. Everything is always in a state of flux and change. There's no such thing as time. There's no past. There's no present. There's just an endless flow and change of states. And certainly the anarch fits in with that idea. It's in a constant flux. It's in a constant state of change. Uh, but yeah, should we move into sort of the final part and sort of give our sort of thoughts on the novel as a whole?
Oh, I thought that's what we've been doing for the last 40 minutes.
I guess we kind of have, yeah. I just meant like the final sort of uh sort of statement on what we thought of the whole thing
Oh yeah,
in a
yeah,
general.
sure. Uh, sure. Let me just take a. Can we just like talk about for like 10 minutes on how it relates to our society because I want to touch up on how you're saying that it's making a resurgence and rightly so, and it's very funny because at the end of the novel it made a resurgence in uh through the hands of Martin's brother. So it's almost like we're Martin's brother too, right? By talking about it and by archiving it onto the channel, and hopefully it will make it a resurgence. So if you don't mind, can we spend a little 10 minutes on talking about Eumeswil and contemporary society, and then we can talk about um, what like a final statement on the novel.
Yeah, it's fine. No, that's perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah, we might want to include maybe why you chose this book as well.
Sure, sure. I'll put that at the final statement. Yeah. Or actually, the answer might be relevant to why society, why, uh, how it's relevant to society. Well, why did I? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, one of the person in another, one of the members in another server, just like randomly texted me, like suggestion for you, Colin Ernst Jünger, and then a month went by, and then I finally Wikipedia'd him, and then like wow, I really like what he's saying. Like he had a I mean, history and philosophy is my two favorite subjects, right? Just like Martin, and like he lived through history and he lived through philosophy too. So and I like a lot of his ideas. I read a few synopses from on Pain. It resonated with me, and definitely the Anarch. That's what resonated with me too, the most. So I'm like, all right, well, let me pick up, let me look into what this Eumesville is, right? If it's talking about this weird concept that I am drawn to intuitively, right? It was like, how do you say, James? It's felt before it was pronounced, right? Like you're going to like a music genre before you actually fully listen to it. So yeah, like I intuitively knew that I was gonna like this Anarch guy. So I look into Eumesville, and I see how it's like a it's I see what um society like is in Eumesville, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's exactly like ours. So I kind of decided to do Eumesville before I knew that it had to do it for society. And so that, I hope that answers your question, Elliot. Where it's like, wow, it was more about this whole um it was a more proactive thing, right? It was for what, it was what for instead of what against, right? It was for the fact that he was like this inwardly free individual, independent of any like system. I'm like, hey, that kind of jives my personality. And then I realized that it was also simultaneously, the book was against like the last men of Williamsville. And I think we're in a very technologically dominant society. um, we have all the like all the things at our fingertips, right? In our smartphones, all of that. And um, also you see a lot of the consumerism, and especially in like um, in cosmopolitan places, right? It's almost like a dead end. So the only direction that they can go is downwards, right? Into consumerism, indulging in like in all that jazz, because they can't create something else. There's no new frontiers now in the cosmopolitan world, right? Like where else are you gonna go, right? Like are you gonna find new land? No, you can't do that. You could only go into the materialist direction instead of like the more natural direction. By natural, I mean like Mother Nature, not not the opposite of artificial. But yeah, so I really do think that like you could get that cosmopolitan culture and compare it to Eumesville, because Eumesville itself is a dead end, right? There's no other city besides Eumesville. Eumesville is like the last vestige of civilization, if you could even call it that. So I do think that Eumesville is relevant to our society, but that is not the reason why I decided to do this book.
Yeah, okay. That's a good
Just
answer.
I was gonna say it's kind of interesting that I stumbled upon this book a long time ago accidentally. I think I was reading Mishima, Yukio Mishima, and I was kind of looking for. I finished a few of his works, and it was like, who else? Sort of like sort of a reactionary kind of writer, or someone someone with an interesting writing style counter to what we mostly comes out today. And Junger came up, and I'd read Storm of Steel a long time ago, but I was like, all right, I'll read some of his other stuff, and I think I went to the German section of a library, and I was like, "There's no way there's going to be any Junger books here. There's no way, no way." But there was, and there was actually a really good selection. And like I grabbed the Glass Bees in Eumeswil, and yeah, it was just a happy accident that I found this book. Uh, because like I said, this book was seems to have been lost. I'll kind of mention this in my closing statement, but yeah, like this is a lost classic of the 20th century. There's no, I've never seen another book quite like this, and I'm glad it sort of came back up to the surface.
Yeah, it's definitely the way I put it is the dystopian novel that no one has ever heard, yet everyone knew.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, actually. Yeah, its ideas are very much floating around now. I mentioned before that Curtis Yarvin, the Mencius Moldbug guy, he's taken a lot of Eumesville and sort of turned it into his own work, like a series of essays called Grey Mirror, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is just my closing thoughts on how it relates to society. Then you can give it, and then we can move on to our statement about the book itself. But like you gotta remember, man, this book was written 50 years ago. Like I still mistakenly think that the 1970 was 30 years ago, right? But no, it's half a century ago by now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's amazing. Some of the stuff in this book as well, mentioned zombies and just the technology and the direction society would go in, and technology, and just all the stuff we've been talking about, the last man, and just I mean, I'm forgetting a lot of. I'm blanking on it like a fool right now, but there's so much in this book. We could have done a whole section. It might have been, it wouldn't have been as interesting, but we could have done a whole section on just stuff that was predicted, or well, I
yeah.
guess we're kind of doing that
Yeah,
now. Actually,
that's kind of the point of like how it relates to contemporary society though. Like, you know, like he predicted like just how intrusive and dominant technology can be and all that, you know?
yeah, and just the way the society would go, right? It didn't turn into a 1984 esque, iron butt on your face. It didn't turn into communist utopia, right? It turned into just a kind of stagnant pool of consumerism, crime, which is just sort of tolerated because why not? And just a grayness, a mundaneness, a complete lack of ideas. The professors, I mean, his talks about the university are spot on. Again, at least 20 years ahead of their time, maybe 30 years ahead of their time. His understanding of how the media works. Remember, we had I forget his name, but the journalist.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
just so
Zoe.
much great stuff. Yeah, that's that, and just like we could go through the whole thing. I mean, the way, and of course the Luminar, which basically kind of functions like the internet in some strange way. Now there was hints of the internet at that time, but a German guy Junger never rode a car in his life. He never drove a car, unless he did in the army at some point. But certainly never owned one. He certainly would never have kept up with computers, but he seems to have predicted that. The Phonophore, again, that device that's very much like an iPhone, which sort of gives status, very interesting as well. Sports, just so much in this book. It's just like it's nuts.
Yeah, you know, yeah, man, yeah, you're right. You could definitely go on for ages and ages on this, right? Like you just mentioned journalism and like the media, university professors, right? Like what are they without the funding, man? Like, they can talk forever and forever and say nothing. Like and you know, I mean, back in Rome, you know, for they had like they had like a um, contained environment of empty, vain, day to day passing. Right? It's called the Colosseum and the gladiators. Right? That's where they went and they just had some empty entertainment. But now it's everywhere. It's in their TVs, right? When you watch the news, they can talk. They have these talking points, and they can talk and talk and talk and say nothing. Um, it's just so surreal because it's in our living room now. You go outside, and I mean, I know I sound like a boomer, but like it's just so nauseating with all the advertisement, and it's just so like there's no depth to them, right? There's nothing real to it. It's I mean, to take another cliche from Fight Club, right? Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy, and you just have the entire world replicating itself ad nauseum. That the real self, the real, you could say the anarch, it's gone now. Like you can't see it anymore, and maybe it's not in this world anymore, right? Maybe it's not in this cosmopolitan world. Maybe it's in the forest, right? Um, yeah,
Yeah, it's exactly as you say. I mean, we could talk about this for a very long time, but this book, uh, this book does seem. I'm going to bring this in my closing statement, but the book is essentially timeless. It seems to transcend time.
yeah. I mean, we passed that 10-minute mark that I was talking about, so you could definitely segue into the final statement. No problem. You can go on with that.
Yeah, just for everybody listening who maybe just listened along but hasn't read it, this is one of those incredibly, this is the jewel that you've sort of you found in the rough. This is one of those lost classics that really has to be read to be believed. I can't think of any book quite like it. The closest I can think is a French book called The Wisdom of the Sands, but even then, it's not it's nowhere near quite like this. This is a very unique text. Like I said, it seems to transcend time, both in its ideas and when it was written, and what it's because it mixes the past, right? I mean, there's so much history in this book, and then there's so much accuracy about the present, and then there's a lot of ideas there about the future, right? So it's just this. While the novel itself seems to play with time in its actual story, and its actual narrative, the ideas play with time. The author's playing with time, and it gives it an otherworldly feel, a timeless feel, right? I mean, the city itself is named after one of the generals of Alexander the Great's generals who fought in the wars of the Diadochi. But yet, this novel is taking place, what seems like maybe the 22nd century, maybe some it could be late 21st century. Who knows? Things. It's very hard to get a grasp of when things take place, or even where they took place geographically. I mean, some places are mentioned, like Beirut is mentioned. Is that our Beirut? Is this a different city just called that? So strange, and the ideas are so rich in depth, right? It's the complete opposite of a modern book or what you were talking about, modern advertising, right? Every paragraph is just you could mine it for a very long time. You can draw water up that well for a very long time, and I'm sure the water would be cool and refreshing, uh, because this book is just jam packed with an incredibly it's jam packed with the life of a man who lived a very long time and lived one of the most interesting lives I think of the 20th century. Even though he spent half of it, even though he spent a good chunk of it just at his home in southern Germany, he was still invited to lots of things. He still knew a lot of people. People would visit him. French presidents visited him. He met with a lot of people. He understood power. He understood history. He understood biology. He seems to have, way ahead of his time, understood technology. He rubbed shoulders with Carl Schmitt, with Picasso. He knew Nazis, he knew communists, he knew anarchists, he knew liberals, he knew everybody. When he was in Paris, he knew absolutely everybody, and it's all crammed into this novel, which gives it that strange timeless feel. And yeah, read it because this is a classic, an overlooked classic, and get in while it's hot.
Yeah, definitely, man. You just hit it right on the money there. Um, you mentioned a lot of things as to why you should read it, why Junger's like a really cool guy. I'm not gonna get into that because you just said what I was thinking. So I guess I'll kind of go along the theme of like how you found it in the German section of a library, because that's more personal, right? So like that's definitely something that hasn't been said before. Whereas uh, the timelessness, the transcendence, it's all been said. So I won't repeat that. What I will say is not even finishing the second chapter, like I knew that this was one of my favorite, if not the favorite book that I've ever read. Right? Some books, like I'm near the end, and it's like, oh man, it's clicking together, man. I really enjoy it. This book, it's second chapter, right? And you have to remember, it's more accurate to say prologue and end as a storyline rather than beginning, middle, and end. So like we're basically like we just scratched the prologue, and there was just so much like it was like a million different punches at you with like as you said like technology, commentaries on government, language. Like dude, the language part was the absolute best for me. Like the degree to which we communicate and the degree to which we can these days we have so many words at our disposal and yet so little things to say, right? He has this way of um, perfect harmonization of uh, talking about a lot of these dry stuff like linguistics, um, modern day contemporary society, sociology, psychology, politics, all that. Like these are on the surface, they're dry, right? And maybe because the reason why they seem dry is because when other people present it, they don't have that timelessness, right? They don't have that like living 100 years, um, living in one life, um, more than what others do in 10 lives, right? They don't have that, right? You go to university and it's like it's really dry there. It's so stifling, man. Like I don't know if you're graduated yet or whatever, but I'm still in it, and there's just some like the cosmopolitan culture that I talked about. There's just something so bland about the learning. Uh, no one really cares to learn in the university. No one really cares to teach. Um, and so like that's why I'm stuck with that's why I'm stuck with the internet like this and talking about the book club, right? Because this is how I learn best from like actual people who are like passionate about uh like what they're talking about, and like when he sees this like such passionate works, right? Like that's this is when like education becomes like a living entity, and like really I'm so glad that I read this book because like damn, like it's like it really speaks to you, and maybe that's a testament to the fact that maybe Junger is right, that maybe there is like an anarch in all of us. Otherwise, it wouldn't resonate with us on such a deep level, right? And I think you definitely should get it, right? If because um you definitely won't get it anywhere else in this life because um it's all dead out there. It's on this book, trust me. So those are my thoughts on it. Um oh yeah, I just one more thing. The day after this is published, um I will do a book review on this book. You could check it out in the playlist. It will be under book reviews, just playlist. It will be a lot shorter, 15 minutes, probably 15 to 25. So check that out. But yes, most important thing is it is timeless. You gotta get this, man. You really do. Um, one of the best books I've ever read because it really just brings to life itself. That's how I can say it.
I think that's perfect.
Yeah, this book is truly unique in pretty much every way I can think of, really. It deserves so much more thought I can put into it, even if I knew the concepts uh, as well as you two, or even better. It really has been very well crafted together, and we could go on for hours. Again, still never touch sort of true meaning and true ideas behind it. I really hope that I return to this book when I get a better grasp of sort of sociology and philosophy in the future.
Yeah, 100% right. Like definitely like okay, like reading through the book, I figured like in the in the perfect scenario, one would understand like the knowledge required to understand Hegel feminology, right? So then you grasp the ego in its own because it's like a rebuttal to Hegel, and then you understand Nietzsche, and then you get into Eumeswil, and I understand none of the above. The most I understand is Nietzsche, but like again, I've only read like what Twilight, Antichrist, um, and the first part of Zespokes or Sestra. So really, I'm only scratching the surface of Nietzsche there. So yeah, definitely, Elliot. Good on you for reminding me that second time reading when I'm a lot smarter, it's gonna I'm definitely gonna be able to get more water out of that wellspring for sure.
Yeah, this was my second time reading it, and I can definitely confirm that, yeah, a lot more clicked, and I'm sure a lot more will click the third time and the fourth time, because I will definitely be rereading this again, maybe once a year. This is one of those books you should come back to at least once a year or once every 2 years, and sort of see if you can mine a little more gold from these pages.
Yeah. Yeah. Holy man, it is a bit surreal. This is right. It's man, it's so it's so like on a very meta level. It's so weird because what did the Martin do when he finished with the city? He went to the forest, right? When he finished with Eumeswil, he went to the forest. It's so meta because like we just finished with Eumeswil. This is our fourth and final episode for this book, right? For Eumeswil, and we just finished, and now it's our turn to go to the forest, right? It's our turn to move on with the next book, with our next choice in life, with our next um, whatever, right? Wherever the Anarch calls us, we shall go to it. I think it's very neat in that way, where it's Martin finished with Eumesville, and now he's moving on. We finished with Eumesville, and now we got to move on too. But um, maybe one day Martin's gonna come back to Eumesville, just like we probably will too. That's
Yeah,
yeah.
that's an interesting way of thinking about it. Yeah.
All right. So I mean, for those of you listening, thanks for sticking with us. This is, like I said, it's not the first book that we started. That's Brothers Karamazov, but it is the first book that we finished. And really, I gotta thank you guys for listening, and I also gotta thank you, James and Elliot, and other people that joined. Christian, I think Aaron joined. I don't know. Aaron definitely joined once for the Brothers Karamazov. But yeah, and then yeah, so like whoever joined here, like I want to thank you for making this possible, because like really, at the very least, we need three people who are willing to talk, and you've definitely put yourself out there, and you've definitely shared a lot of insight, and really for me, what you did was, I have to like read something over and over just to like understand it, but you kind of accelerated that, and you kind of like um kind of it's you kind of gave your insights and your perspectives, because you guys have your own backstory in life, right? You have your own conceptualizations of life, so definitely like we're not, in that sense, we're not reading the same story, right? And so I guess to those listening, right, I want you to like, if you haven't yet already, like pick up the book, because the Eumesville that I read is gonna be different from the Eumesville that James and Elliot read, and it's gonna be the different Eumesville from what you read, because um, I guess we all have a different Anarch, I guess.
Yeah, no problem, man. Anytime. I'm happy to do this again for some other text too. Time to move on. That's the end of our little Oymasville adventure.
Yeah. What about you, Elliot? Any last words before I cut the recording?
Uh, I have just, same as I did with my first philosophy book I ever read, jumped into this, but I was strangely inclined and like it.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's it.
Dude.
I-
Sometimes you just gotta go in head first. Um, and just wear a helmet and just like meet all the obstacles, right? Sometimes you gotta do the little secondary reading companions, but sometimes you just gotta like get in head first. And this is one of those books because, like I said, it's the dystopia novel that you've never heard of but always knew. So I think, Elliot, you definitely made the right choice there on that regard.
Yeah. I just wish I could understand it better.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's a very solemn farewell to this project, but lest Eumesville become another Eumesville, we have to cut it while it's still alive. Um, we don't wanna exhaust ourselves and become the last man and the zombies. We do have to go to the condor calls us into the forest, and we shall go there and hunt. So on that note, thank you for listening. Thank you guys for chatting with me, Discord is in the Discord, Instagram, blog, all that is in the description. I'll add the timestamps soon enough. Please like and subscribe. If you haven't, please check out the other books. Again, I cannot thank you enough for listening, but I do have to cut it soon, lest the meaning behind this gratitude becomes lost. So, farewell.